Agency Board meeting for January 12th, 2021. My last meeting as the RDA chair. Welcome to today's Redevelopment Agent Board. Wow, I'm going to try to read and speak. Welcome to today's Redevelopment Agency Board meeting. Due to the ongoing practice of social distancing, RDA meetings continue to be entirely remote, which means there isn't a location to attend meetings in person. Please keep joining us remotely until the day it's safe to gather again together. Although conducting our meetings electronically is different from our familiar in-person public process, although at this point, unfortunately, this electronic meeting is becoming all too familiar to us. But it is still an open and public meeting, and we welcome members of the public who may be watching our usual video feeds on the City Council's agenda page, YouTube, SLC TV, or Facebook Live. We are glad to have you here with us and hope that you are all staying safe. We start out our RDA board meetings with comments to the board. As a reminder, written comments can be submitted to RDA offices at P.O. Box 145455, Salt Lake City, Utah 84114. Your comments about any RDA business, or if you have any feedback to give us regarding today's meeting setup, please feel free to contact us. And just as when we were meeting in person, the board has a system for receiving public comment. Our goal is to ensure an orderly, non-disruptive, efficient, and safe opportunity for all people to comment, even when we are meeting virtually. We are accepting public comments through both WebEx, and for those whose only option to call in, staff will be monitoring a separate telephone line to include any callers into the meeting. And I will go over that process now. Robert Nutzman is helping moderate our meeting, and based on the order that people have joined the WebEx. He will state the name of the first person to comment, followed by the next commenter who can then prepare to speak. When the meeting host unmutes your line and lets you know it's your turn, please state your first and last name just as you would in our in-person meetings. Indicate the topic you are speaking on, and then your 2 minutes will begin. To limit disruption and ensure the efficient operation of our meeting, the first and last name cannot include a message or violate our rules of decorum. If your registered name doesn't meet this requirement, then our staff will use the chat feature to gather that information from you. If you are unable to give a first and last name that meets this requirement, our staff is happy to direct you to another forum because your message is important to us. If you also, to help facilitate our comment period, please be respectful, avoid yelling and making racial slurs, obscene or defamatory remarks. And with that, we will turn it over to Bobby and see if there are any comments to the RDA board this afternoon.
Good afternoon, Board Chair. There are no commenters to the board this afternoon.
Excellent. Well, we hope that people are listening and appreciate any participation. With that, we will move on in our agenda to agenda item B, a public hearing. We have none. And so we'll move to agenda item C1, approval of our minutes from Tuesday, May 5th of 2020. Seems like a long time ago that we would have needing minutes to be approved. Is that an accurate date?
Madam Chair, I will message the recorder's office and our agenda team just to make sure. I actually don't know the answer to that question, but I'll just double check. Thanks.
Our motions sheet does say Tuesday, May 5th of 2020. It must have perhaps fallen through the cracks at some point, but we will wait until Jen gets back with us real quick.
That is the minutes that are included in our packet.
Yeah, I was just going to say that they're in the packet, but maybe in the interest of time, I will message those folks, and then maybe you can come back to that item on the agenda later in the meeting, if that's okay.
That's perfect. We can skip it. And we could then move to item C2, which is the election of a new chair and vice chair. Just so we know, similar to how we elect our chairperson for the city council, this is a similar process. The board will take a straw poll to nominate the board chair, which is a 2-year term, and the vice chair, a 1-year term. So with that, I would call for nominations for a new board chair.
Madam Chair,
Madam Chair.
Yes, board member Mono.
I nominate Board Member Ana Valdemoros to serve as the RDA Board Chair.
Great. I have one nomination. Is there anybody else? Board member Valdemoros, would you like to speak to this nomination?
Well, thank you so much. Current chair and board member Mano for the nomination. I'm excited, guys, to if you have the confidence in me to take on this role for the next 2 years, to continue the work that council board chair Father started and has been working on, and also come up with some new ideas and some new things that I want to work on. So I know everybody has different interests in their different districts, and I hope we can get to them in one way or another.
Perfect. Thank you, board member Valdemoros. Cindy and or Jennifer, the agenda says just a straw poll. We don't need to do an official vote. We can just do a straw poll on this, or do we need to do a vote similar to what we did with the chair, vice chair for council? Because I can't remember.
My understanding is that it would be similar, but maybe because it's unanimous, if it's unanimous, it could be fine to just take a voice vote. I think the key is just that each person, we have to, for the record, know how each person voted. But I don't know, Bobby, are you ready to put the poll up if we need to do it that way?
I have the polls available if you'd like to use them.
Okay.
And Madam Chair, we probably should check that for future, because RDA sort of has the briefing and the formal action combined, and I don't know if we really should have a, maybe we refer to it as a straw poll. It probably should be a motion, if not a resolution. So maybe instead of straw poll, you could accept a motion, just to cover all your bases.
Okay, I see Katie nodding her head, but Katie, do you mind stepping in too?
Yeah, I agree. I actually was going to say something very similar to Cindy. Because the RDA takes action in the same meeting as your work session, it would be best if you took formal action. I don't know that it needs to be a resolution, and of course we don't have one prepared for this meeting, but certainly a formal motion and a second and then a roll call vote would be, that would be good for the record.
Okay, great. So with that, board members, we do have a nomination for Ana Valdemoros to act as chair. Is there a second on this?
I second it.
So I have a motion by board member Mono, a second by board member Dugan. I will do a roll call vote on this. Board member Valdemoros.
Yes.
Board member Johnston.
Yes.
Board member Dugan.
Yes.
Board member Mono.
Yes.
Board member Rogers.
Yes.
And I am a yes as well. So that is unanimous, except board member Wharton is not present with us at this moment. So congratulations, board member Valdemoros. Board chair, sorry. With that, we would be looking for a nomination for vice chair.
Madam Chair,
Yes, board member Mono.
I nominate Councilmember Dan Dugan for Vice Chair of the RDA Board.
All right.
Second that.
Was that you, James?
It is.
Okay. I have a motion by board member Mono to nominate board member Dugan as vice chair, and a second by board member Rogers. Board member Dugan, would you like to speak to this at all?
Well, thank you for the nomination, and if approved, I look forward to working with Anna and the rest of the board on moving our projects forward. And I'm excited for doing this, and appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, great. Well, let's roll call it. So Board Member Valdemoros,
Yes.
Board Member Dugan,
Yes.
Board Member Johnston, Board
Yes.
Member Mano,
Yes.
Board Member Rogers.
Yes.
And I am a yes as well. So congratulations, Board Member Dugan, on being the new RDA Vice Chair. And Board Member Wharton is not present yet. So congrats, you get to start your duties next week. I can continue with the meeting unless Anna wants to take over, but
I heard you would like to do it, so totally fine. No,
I made Chris do it last week too, so it's karma.
all right.
All right. Well, now we are going to move on to agenda item number 3, which is the resolution for a loan to Wasatch Community Gardens for an affordable housing development. We will have Danny Walls, Tammy Hunsaker, Ashley Ogden, and I believe Ashley Patterson and Chris Parker are the applicants for this. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okie doke, Danny, it's all you.
Thank you, outgoing Madam Chair. Congratulations, incoming Madam Chair and Mr. Vice Chair. So appreciate that and look forward to working with both of you. This item before the board today is request for consideration and approval of a $250,000 loan to Wasatch Community Gardens for the construction of affordable multifamily housing development. I will turn it over to our Ashley Ogden to speak to this, and then we also have Tammy available for questions, as you stated, and if the board prefers, then we have the applicants for answers as well. So take it away, Ashley.
All right, thank you. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Okay. Do we have the presentation? The slides? Can we pull those
Yeah,
up? Okay.
One moment.
Thanks. Great, and we could go to the next slide if you don't mind. Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Today I'll be presenting a housing development trust fund loan request, which was made by Wasatch Community Gardens, which would help fund the construction of an affordable multifamily housing structure within the larger campus they're currently building near 6 East and 8 South. So if you check out this aerial photo here, the star marks the exact project site, which was historically the backyard of that single family home to the left, and the new apartment structure will have frontage on Green Street. So this afternoon, we are requesting the board consider approving a resolution that would authorize a loan of up to $250,000 to Wasatch Community Gardens, which would be used to help fund that multifamily structure. Next slide, please. So I'm sure you're all very familiar with the applicant. I'm just going to call them Wasatch for short. They typically are not housing developers, but I'll get into that a little bit more on the next slide. They are constructing a 2-story apartment building that will contain 8 studio units that each measure about 425 square feet each. Rents will be kept affordable for those earning up to 70% AMI for a minimum of 50 years. The project will be net zero and will include solar panels. And as you can probably see in the aerial, it's a pretty unique infill development project in one of the city's local historic districts. So the project did already go through the historic design review process and was granted approval from the Historic Landmarks Commission. Next slide, please. So there's a little bit of history on the project I think is worth covering here. Like I said, the loan request would help fund the multifamily structure, but the housing project is only one component of Wasatch's larger campus project, which involves the conversion of 3 single-family properties into a unified campus with an education center, 2 office buildings, and the existing Grateful Tomato Garden will remain. In 2018, Wasatch petitioned the city to rezone 2 parcels to allow for the conversion of 2 historic single-family homes to office uses. The council approved the rezone with the condition that the organization replace the 2 residential units being lost with the change of uses, which is in line with the city's housing loss mitigation ordinance. So for this reason, the rezone won't take effect, and Wasatch cannot establish office uses in those 2 homes until after the new apartment structure's foundation is poured. Next slide, please. So to start getting into the finances, this slide shows the sources and uses for the project, which has a total cost of a little over $1.6 million. About 85% of the total project costs will be funded by Wasatch, with about 40% being cash equity raised from recent fundraising efforts, about 45% in the form of a loan from the organization to the housing project, which will be a standalone legal entity. There are no land costs because Wasatch already owns the property and plans to lease the land to the housing component at no cost. There's also no developer fee. Next slide, please. So one of the most important things under consideration here is the project's ability to repay debt. Wasatch is requesting a fully forgivable loan, meaning no repayment would be made back into the trust fund. A forgivable loans outside of the standard terms and conditions of the Housing Development Trust Fund loan program, but the RDA board does have the authority to grant exceptions to those terms. On the previous slide, you saw what we're considering the primary financing is a loan that Wasatch will make to the housing component, which they've set at 5% interest for 40 years. We found that the project doesn't have sufficient cash flow to support repayment of that loan under their desired terms, with a Housing Development Trust Fund loan under terms that fully comply with all of our program guidelines. To say that another way, to make the loan work, they'll either need to amend the terms of their own loan, or the RDA board will need to grant exceptions to standard terms of the Housing Development Trust Fund loan program. So as part of this review, we did look at some other feasible loan structures that involve repayment to the fund. In the next few slides, we'll cover 3 potential structures for your consideration. Under all 3 options, the project is projected to generate positive cash flow once leased up and maintain a minimum debt coverage ratio of 1.1. Next slide, please. This first option is the forgivable loan, which is the applicant's request. The RDA does have some experience in administering these loans. For example, our Granary District Adaptive Reuse Loan Program was structured this way. But basically, as long as the project meets some pretty standard conditions, it would be a no interest, no payment loan. The principal would be forgiven in equal installments over a 5-year period. This structure would require the RDA board to waive 2 of the standard conditions of the loan program, the interest rate and the repayment. Next slide, please. So option 2 was the Housing Trust Fund Advisory Board's recommendation to you, the RDA board, after they reviewed this request at their December 2nd meeting. It involves administering the loan in a way that meets all standard terms of the loan program, which would require Wasatch to amend the terms on their loan, which again, they are lending to the housing project. So for example, the pro forma contained in your packet shows if they reduce the interest rate on their loan from 5% to 4%, there'd be adequate cash flow to repay the Housing Trust Fund loan at the 2.25% interest rate, which the project is eligible for. So the applicant, they've indicated this isn't their preferred option, but staff thought it was important to present it since the applicant's essentially the senior lender setting the terms of their own loan. This loan would have a 30-year term with annual hard repayments and a balloon payment on any outstanding balance at the end of the term. And again, it would not require any waivers of the standard terms and conditions of the loan program. Next slide, please. So this is the last option. It is RDA staff's recommendation, which we also made to the Housing Trust Fund Advisory Board. It's a cash flow loan. So it would have more flexible repayment terms than what is standard, but it would at least involve payments being made back into the Housing Trust Fund. Wasatch's primary loan terms could remain the same with their desired 5% interest rate. And the way we've modeled the trust fund loan is with the 2.25% interest rate that the project is eligible for with a 30-year term. They would make annual repayments that amount to 75% of available cash flow after they make that primary loan payment to the organization. If everything went as projected, it's estimated the principal and interest could be repaid in full before the end of the 30-year term. However, if cash flow is not sufficient to repay the loan by the end of the term, staff is proposing the outstanding principal and interest to be forgiven rather than requiring that typical balloon payment at the end. This structure would require the board to waive one standard condition, the repayment type. Next slide, please. So this is the last slide. It shows how the project aligns with council's funding priorities contained in the growing SLC housing plan. I highlighted a few in red because I think the statements provide an opportunity to touch on some of the public benefits that this project will bring. First, when it comes to the affordability of the project, 70% AMI is by no means deeply affordable, but I think council staff made a good point in their memo that while the project isn't technically located within a high opportunity area as defined by council, it's very close to those areas. So being on the east side, very close to downtown, the 900 South frequent bus corridor is 1 block to the south. So the project will create slightly more affordable housing, in an area with decent opportunity that's losing the level of affordability that it once had. And second, I think it's important to acknowledge the project involves adding density to one of our local historic districts, which for many reasons isn't always feasible. Going through the historic design review does add some steps to the permitting process and ultimately holds the design and quality of the project to a higher standard. Last, I think it's fair to consider this a creative financing model for the organization. They could have easily carved off the property and sold it to a market rate developer, but instead have embraced the project as a long-term investment for the organization while making sure to infuse values they find important like sustainability and affordability. That's it for my presentation. I know that Ashley Patterson, the director of Wasatch Community Gardens, is here, and I think she had a few slides she wanted to share as well, if that's okay.
Thank you, Ashley Ogden. Before we get to Ashley Patterson, I would like to turn the time over to our council staff and Deputy Director Jennifer Bruno, and then I will turn it over to Ashley Patterson, and then I'll open it up to everyone for questions to any of you. It'll be a big surprise on who the question's directed to. So Jen, if you don't mind kind of giving some of the highlights of the staff report that has, and some of those policy questions, please. Sorry, I skipped you in the beginning, by the way.
Oh, you're fine. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think actually Ashley did a great job walking through the options that the RDA staff has presented for the board to consider. I think just a few of the policy considerations that our staff noted is that the term forgivable loan is in and of itself kind of a concept that the board and council have gotten away from over the last few years, just based on the concept of needing those funds to revolve in a more regular basis. And so that's not a concept that you guys typically pursue, although Ashley points out that you do have the ability to make exceptions if you decide to. The other sort of unique aspect of this project is that because Wasatch Community Gardens is in a sense their own lender, that concept of them setting their own loan terms is another sort of interesting aspect of this project that we don't see very often. Typically, the project has secured financing from a third-party lender, and as such has a specific gap that they're working with. And in this case, I think the terms of that loan are sort of determinative of what that other gap is. So those are the only things that I really wanted to point out. But thank you for the time, and I'm happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Thank you, Jen. And then Ashley Patterson, if we can turn the time over to you for a few minutes. The stage is yours.
Yeah, great. Is it possible to get the slides shown. So, okay, great. Is Chris Parker also able to comment at this time? Can both of us be
Of
part
course.
Okay. So I'm Ashley Patterson. I'm the Executive Director of Wasatch Community Gardens, and Chris Parker has been a pro bono consultant for us on this project. As Ashley Ogden noted, we're not a housing developer, so we've been challenged, and he's been very kind. So next slide, please. Our mission is to empower people to grow and eat healthy, organic, local food. And the reason I put this up is just to make that point again, that this is a bit of a stretch for us. It's been fun to learn how to do this, and I'm honestly quite proud of the project we're putting together. But this is a tough business, and this is an expensive way to do it. So I do kind of want to make that point to you all as we go through a couple of other things. Next slide, please. Ashley talked about this and showed this, and it was in your packet, I'm sure, but I wanted to make the point that the existing garden is 0.55 acres, and it is protected under conservation easement. So in 2016, the organization gave up voluntarily the development rights to this property. And so it's permanently protected agricultural open space that the city gets to enjoy. We will be adding roughly 0.25 extra acres of productive green space to this neighborhood with this expansion. And so that's kind of shown on the eastern side of the slide as in the green spaces. We're also adding an indoor kitchen and workshop space for the community to enjoy as well. Next slide, please. Ashley showed this as well. And the thing I wanted to point out with the elevations of the housing is also to reiterate the point about working in an existing neighborhood. It is a historic district, so it does have a lot of requirements, and we did have to go through the Historic Landmarks Commission. So we're trying to pack a lot of apartments into a pretty small space because we really have height restrictions as well. And so getting to this point has created a lot of significant hurdles, and we were able to get 8 apartments into this pretty tiny space. It's a 3,200 square foot building with only 1,600 square footprint. Next slide, please. So I put this slide up, and this is something you all as the RDA know way more intimately than I do. But I think we've been inundated for the past many years with the literally crisis of affordable housing in the city. And this, as Ashley Ogden noted, we really only needed to build 2 units. There is an additional caretaker's apartment that's not part of this application. So there's actually 9 apartments that are part of this campus. And we really felt like we wanted to, when we were required to replace the housing, we really wanted to look at an opportunity to help solve some other additional problems. So not only work on the mission that we have, but think more expansively about how we could take this requirement and turn it into an opportunity that helps the city and helps our organization. So that's why we're deed restricting it to 70% AMI. And it's also why we maximize the number of apartments that we could build. Next slide. So in requesting some special terms, this project is really intended to show that we need to get more people involved in thinking about and supporting affordable housing. And I think as a community-based nonprofit, we have a unique opportunity to really engage philanthropy in this vision. In my travels and trying to raise the money for the project, I would say that a lot of significant donors in this area don't feel that affordable housing is something that they traditionally support. Of course, they support the notion of it, but not necessarily in their donations. And so this is an opportunity to get them involved in this process. I will say that they weren't always so excited about us doing this. And so providing a model, hopefully that is successful, I think is something that can be pointed to create more of these small infill projects around the city in these existing neighborhoods where it is pretty tough to do what we're trying to do. We also looked at it as the opportunity, because this, once it's built, it will have the opportunity to spin off some revenue for us, so we can help meet our own mission and build more garden spaces, potentially by having this housing component serve as a revenue generator for our organization. And we look at it as Ashley Ogden pointed out, we do have stocks and bonds that we have set aside for our rainy day funds when things like global pandemics come up. And in this way, we thought expansively about how potentially we could use affordable housing rather than just buying stocks and bonds and mutual funds. We could actually invest in our own community as an investment in ourselves. So we really kind of want you all to think of this as a model that could potentially be duplicated to get more of these little infill projects around the city. Next slide. I also want to point out that while affordable housing is at a crisis level, so is agricultural space in our region. So this is just a map of our area in 1973, with the bright red being agricultural land. And then if you go to the next slide, can you go to the next slide? There's hardly any bright red left, and that's 12 years ago. So while we're also struggling to find places for people to live, we're losing our agricultural land as well. So this project, I think, is a unique opportunity to look at both of those issues. Next slide. As you all may know, there is a community food assessment that Salt Lake City did in 2012. And of the top 5 issues, 4 of them are accommodated by this project, which is number 2 and number 5 are related to space and community garden space. And number 3 and number 4 are related to education and learning about how to grow food. And so this project, not the housing component, but the project, the larger project, helps to solve that issue, which has been identified as a priority for Salt Lake City as well. Next slide. I also wanted to point out that Wasatch Community Gardens work is fundamentally rooted in equity and diversity. And this is a slide of our job training farm that's down in the Depot district, where we work with women who are currently experiencing homelessness. And our housing component will also prioritize equity and diversity, and that's a big part of what we intend to do with that additional asset. Next slide, which is our last one. So I understand this is a big ask, and I'm really looking to think expansively as a group about how to innovatively think about these big problems that we're facing. And I know this is a small project, and it's not going to solve any of these problems, but it offers a model for others to emulate. And so that's, I think, the power of the project, and the why I think it deserves potentially some some extra consideration. Chris, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you did a great job. I would just say from Gibbs' perspective, we're really excited about this project. It's very rare in several aspects. As Ashley mentioned, if the city were to go and try to buy parkland on the east side, a quarter-acre parkland in this neighborhood probably cost you about $500,000, and then you'd have to pay to maintain and run it. Here, in some ways, you're kind of getting that for free. That really is part of the reason why we're interested. Gibb would not be in a position where we would be as excited about supporting 70% AMI units at a relatively moderate ask per unit, but because it's a combination of two factors, both of which I think are very appropriate city uses, there's no way you could touch the efficiency of combining those two into one relatively minor ask in the scale of things. I think the model that WCG has come up with as well is exceedingly rare on the financial side. Projects that provide affordable housing that not only do not have developer fee, but also donate $500,000, substantial portion of their capital stack, that do not use LIHTC, that basically are an organization putting a real emphasis where they're not a housing provider. It wouldn't happen with housing providers, but it certainly wouldn't happen with organizations that weren't housing providers, in addition to effectively donating land. If you look at the total amount that Wasatch is donating, contributing, otherwise not getting a return on this project, it's actually multiples of their ask for the city. So for me, that's why we're here. Apart from Ashley being a very charismatic person in a very wonderful organization, we just think it's a very unique opportunity for the city generally to kill several birds with one stone, and do so in a way that probably will not happen again in this neighborhood. So yeah, we're in heavy support. Happy to answer any question on the actual economics of it, and appreciate your consideration.
Thank you, Chris and Ashley. Board member Fowler asked me to take over for a minute. She had something come up, so I think we can open this for discussion with the board members. If you have questions for the applicants or for staff, I think if I can start, and I think I can tag team with Darren Mano, with board member Mano. We had a question on option 3, if RDA staff can clarify how that works. Again?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. Let me pull that up really quick. So the third option was the cash flow based repayment. So basically, we've modeled it out, charging the 2.25% interest rate, which the project would be eligible for under the standard terms. So basically, after Wasatch makes their primary loan payment, which is essentially the housing component, would make the payment to Wasatch Community Gardens, since they're lending themselves money. After they make that payment, 75% of the available cash flow after that would go to the RDA. So it's more of a flexible variable payment.
Madam Chair.
There you go. Sorry, I lost the mute button. Go ahead, board member Manu.
Thanks. So Ashley, does that mean that the principal loan stays at the 5% that Wasatch Community Gardens was originally planning on? And then, because I thought that when you were talking about option 1, you said that if their principal loan was at 5%, they'd have no money to repay the RDA's loan. So what's the difference between option 1 and option 2, and how does that cash flow, how do we project that there may potentially be cash flow in option 3 as opposed to option 1?
So option 1 is the forgivable loan. So that wouldn't involve, that would be forgiven over 5 years in 5 increments. But option 2 was the structure where it was structured in a way that meets all the terms, guidelines of the trust fund loan program. So that's the one, option 2, to meet all of the standard terms of the program, Wasatch Community Gardens would need to amend the terms they want to set on their own primary loan. So one way to do that, for example, was reducing the interest rate that they're essentially charging themselves from 5% to 4%. And that actually would pencil out that there would be sufficient cash flow then to repay the trust fund at the 2.25%. The third option with the cash flow is, sorry, I forgot what your second question was.
I guess just if the principal loan stays at 5%, what does that pencil out? Does it still pencil that we probably will get a majority of that loan forgiven, or does it effectively become forgiven just over a 30-year term instead of a 5-year term?
Yeah, so option 3 with the cash flow based repayment, the way we've modeled it out, so if everything went as projected, they would actually, and if we charge interest, I'm estimating that they would be able to pay off the loan in full in year 26. So that would actually occur earlier than under the standard terms on option 2. That's if everything goes as projected, but that's principal and interest in about year 26.
Board member Mono, if I can add just a detail, the underwriting standard in option 1, which the project isn't working with, is the debt coverage ratio of a 1.1. So there's not room for the RDA's loan and the primary loan given by Wasatch Community Gardens to still hit that 1.1 debt coverage ratio, but there is cash flow available to repay the loan. So that's the benchmark we're looking at there. And when modeling housing, we always factor in a vacancy rate and operating costs. So there's a chance that the project could even generate more cash flow than what we've modeled. We're usually a little bit conservative in our models. So that's why we thought option 3 might be a good compromise. Wasatch Community Gardens, being a nonprofit, is still getting the return they're requesting with the 5%. And there is in the model showing adequate cash flow to repay our loan within the 30-year term. It should actually be repaid early if all goes well.
Okay.
Any
other? Yes, go ahead, Board Member Dugan.
I'm trying to simplify for me. Option 1 is forgivable for the in-law loan. Option 2 is that the loan is RDA gets all their money back with a 2.25 interest. Option 3 is they get 75% of their loan back with the 2.25 interest. Is that, am I?
If I could add a little bit to that, option 2, what you said was correct, except Wasatch Community Gardens, I guess, gets a lower return on their investment with the 4% interest rate versus 5. Option 3, we actually, if it, like Tammy said, if everything went well, the loan would be repaid in full early, potentially. The only difference is it's a more flexible repayment, which with us taking a share of their cash flow every year.
Okay, all right. So, all right. Thank you. I have another question outside of the loan.
Okay. Anybody else have questions about the loan terms? Okay, so I don't see anybody, hear anybody.
Madam Chair, I don't know if you can see me. I've got the circles of death on my screen, so.
Oh, yeah, okay. Members Rogers and Johnston both have their hands up.
Okay, so go ahead, Board Member Rogers and then Johnston.
Okay, great. I hate the term forgivable loans. It's to me, it's just a waste. It's what we're talking about is a grant. It's not forgivable loan. It's just giving away money. And I don't know if there's is maybe we can direct them if it doesn't work out the way that they're looking for other opportunities through grants through the city. But there was a comment made about LIHTC too, about low-income housing tax credits not being a good thing. And I think that is actually where we should be looking, is for these LIHTC funding, is because that's where you drop it from 70% to the severely 30 and below AMI. I think that we've seen that in the past when we do and have done forgivable loans, it was because it was so deeply, affordable. And that's why we did that. So for me, I'm struggling with this, looking at even a loan for it. So my question is, in order for them to make this work, do they need a loan from the city? Do they need, from the RDA, do they need some sort of grant in order to make it pencil out?
I'll
Mr. Chair.
take that question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead, Danny.
No. Please, Jen, go ahead in case there's a clarification there and make sure we answer that appropriately.
I just jump in. I jump in when I hear silence because my parents didn't train me well. So it looks like option two is definitely paid back. Option 3 is paid back, like a good scenario, assuming the project pencils out like it's projected to. Option 1 does not. So, but I think that maybe there is some confusion on option 3 because the concept of forgiveness is still sort of inserted or introduced as an option, that if the loan balance is not paid off in that 30 years, even though it's expected to be paid off 30 years, that it would be forgiven. And so maybe that's something the board can explore more with RDA staff, of maybe that phrase is what's causing some concern. I don't know. Danny, sorry to jump in.
No, I appreciate that clarification, Jen, and Board Member Rogers. Appreciate the opportunity to answer those questions as well. The most recent with regard to option 3 and the phrasing for the forgivable loan within that part, that's simply a function of us as RDA staff, as Tammy mentioned, doing the modeling. We feel confident that given the amount of the loan and the term and the available cash flow, that loan will get repaid. We put that language in there simply so that there wasn't any tracking or concern for having some form of a balloon payment at the end. But that's primarily a function of just being confident that the cash flow is there to repay it. That scenario may or may not necessarily hit our debt coverage ratio, but the cash flow is adequate to make the payment. So we don't necessarily have any sensitivity to that language in that regard. With regard to the tax credits, I think that's a very valid statement. Obviously, Ashley Patterson and Chris Parker can jump back in as to why they didn't pursue that. But simply put, as they stated, they are not a housing developer. This is not necessarily a project that I think warrants tax credits within that regard. They're responding to the city's requirement to replace 2 housing units. They're doing 8. There is no affordability requirement as part of that city development agreement. They are infusing that within the project themselves. And so we as an agency feel that they are going above and beyond what their requirements are. And within this area, even though 70% AMI is not necessarily hitting the lower AMI targets that I think we would like to see, at 70%, it wouldn't even qualify for tax credits, which typically target 60% or below. And I think a big part of the reason why they didn't pursue the tax credit avenue is, again, number one, they're not even a housing developer. They're certainly not necessarily experienced in being an affordable housing developer. And it's an even different level of development and developer who would then need to finance, monitor, and oversee a low-income housing tax credit project. So we recognize that. We recognize that what their main goal here is to really just infuse within the benefit of the open space in the garden is hitting another mark with both sustainability and affordability. And so that's why we felt the request was justified, because they have a desire and a vision that goes above and beyond just hitting the bare minimum requirements for that project. And then to your first statement with regard to forgivable loan, we as staff recognize the sensitivity of the board there. I think Ashley Patterson and definitely our own staff can speak to the fact that we have conveyed that to the applicant. That's why we've explored other options. That's why our recommendation is for the middle ground. I do want to say that is something that the board does have the ability to waive. And as we bring policies to the board, specifically the one you will see later with regard to the housing, we have started infusing into those policies the language that that is not a preferred structure. We have taken that sentiment from the board, and we have started shifting our description to the applicants as well as our policies. But I will also ask that as we hear those comments, it's always helpful for us to understand if that's something that we should start changing other policies for, because we did model this loan request based on our existing adaptive reuse program, which was a policy approved that is a forgivable loan. And then also, how does that relate to other projects and other financing and requests citywide that I think there are some other programs that still allow for forgivable loans. And so one of the comments and direction from the council has always been to make sure that we are consistent in our messaging. So we always like to try to convey that to the applicants and make sure that it's clear what the board's position is. That's not a preference. And that's why we're trying to find a solution beyond that. We do see grants much different than forgivable loans. Grants are obviously money that's given up front with usually no ongoing restrictions. All of our forgivable loans require that conditions continue to be met for a period of time, and then that is what allows that loan to be forgiven. If they don't meet those conditions, the documents are recorded against the property. It is still structured as a loan, and it would require repayment at that point. And so recognizing that that's a nuance, that is something that we are adamant about, making sure that we still structure our forgivable loans such that if they don't meet their requirements, it does get repaid. Did I answer all the questions? I don't know if I went through all the points. I tried to keep track.
Thanks, Danny. Board members, was that sufficient? Or do you have additional questions? Oh, actually, Board Member Johnston was next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick question for the developers. If you had an option between options 2 and 3, which would you prefer?
I would prefer option 3.
For the cash flow, you mean? The 5%
Yes.
versus 4%?
Yes.
Okay. Madam Chair, I know there's probably other questions, but I would be comfortable myself moving forward with a motion for option number 3 at some point. Drop over it.
Thank you, Board Member Johnston. Board members, any other questions lingering still about this project? For the staff?
Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
I just have a question on the housing side of the house. So these are 8 studio apartments. Is that for 2 people or is it just 1 person per studio? Can it be a couple?
I think so. You know, Chris might be able to speak to that better than me. They're 425 square feet, so they're small, but you know, I think you can live there as a couple. Chris, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or a parent and a single child, I guess.
Yeah, if they're getting HUD funds or some sort of voucher support, then they usually like it basically 2 per room or 2 per the initial room. So yeah, it would be anticipated that up to 2 people. As far as, you know, policy above that, if someone wanted to bring a couple and a child, I highly doubt there would be a contention from Wasatch Community Gardens, but I might be putting words in their mouth.
No, that would be fine with us.
Okay, because I just asked, we're going from 2 houses, which could have up to, you know, family of 4 to 8 single apartments or condo, or excuse me, studios. So that it's not an increasing number, but there is just, and I was just looking at the family side of the house. So that's why I was wondering about kids or children and asking, because that would be my concern.
And along those lines, who are we, Ashley, I guess it's for Wasatch Community Gardens, are you targeting residents that will be related to staff for Wasatch Community Gardens, or is it open to the general public? I mean, is there any connection between the garden and the apartments in terms of using the garden or being able or working on the garden, anything like that?
It's a great question. I think the idea that we're sort of exploring is that each resident would, should they want it, be able to get one of our free SA shares of produce from our farm every week during the growing season, which we already do for low income people. So we call it a free SA because we give it away.
All right, so, but you're not targeting like staff from Wasatch Community Gardens to be able to live there or anything like that?
The caretaker's apartment, which isn't part of this application, is low paid WCG staff, but these apartments wouldn't necessarily be staff.
Okay. Go ahead, Board Member Dugan.
And did you look into two larger units to have a larger size family along and mix the size of the units, or was that just it didn't size out as far as the design?
That's a great question. Yeah, we did turn over many options. We looked at just doing a duplex. That would have been our minimum requirement. And we ended up going with this. And I mean, to be completely honest, this is going to offer us a better return on investment than bigger units because we were so limited on space. So we didn't want to, honestly, take up any more garden space.
Okay, so there's 8 units. It could be up to 16 people, whether that's a mixture of 2 couples or parent-child. So number-wise, it's about the same as the 2 houses, but it is impacting 8 families or 8 groups versus just 2, if you think of it that way. So I see the benefit of impacting in 8, and then that's good spider web versus 2 families spreading out. So, and it's all of them would be 70% AMI, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I
think it's a wonderful program, so I really do like the Wasatch Garden. I love driving by it every day, or not every day, but every time I do it, I dig it. It's very cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Board Member Dugan. I have another question on this 50-year deed restriction. So this will be affordable for 50 years at 70% or 70% AMI, but does that mean that the price, the $1,000 that it will be for a month for 50 years, or will it change as the AMIs change?
Yeah,
it'll change. Yeah.
All right, so basically the monthly rent is not locked at $1,000. Okay.
No. Yep.
All right. Okay, board members, any other questions or any concerns? Would you like to get more clarification from the applicant and staff before we take a straw poll today, or would you like to do a straw poll on any of the options?
Madam Chair?
Go ahead, Board Member Mano.
Is it a straw poll or are we actually approving the loan today?
They would prefer it if you approved it today. I believe Danny can tell us for certain though.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Cindy. Yeah, we transmit a resolution and request a consideration of that if possible.
I'm comfortable moving forward with option 3. I think that's what Council Member or Board Member Johnson was suggesting.
All right. Any? I cannot see any hands.
Cindy Jensen may have a statement.
Just a question for the board of whether you would like to ask the RDA staff to modify that language that mentions the forgivable loan, since it's such a trigger with other entities who also would like forgivable loans. I think Danny mentioned that that could be done in option 3.
I would agree with that, Madam Chair.
Me too. I'd like that too. Anybody else? Okay.
Madam Chair, I would Move to have a straw poll to approve option 3 with the modification of the terms, taking out forgivable loan for something that more accurately reflects a 30-year loan.
All right, we have a motion by Board Member Johnston. Do we have a second?
I'll second, but isn't it not a straw poll? It's an actual motion. So
Yes.
Sorry, I did a straw poll, didn't I? I apologize. I don't have language in front of me, but I would move to approve the conditions on option 3 of a loan to Wasatch Community Gardens with the language modifications you mentioned earlier to take out forgivable loan terminology.
and I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion by Board Member Johnston and seconded by Board Member Mano. We'll do the roll call. Board Member Johnston,
Yes.
Mano,
Yes.
Wharton,
Yes.
Dugan,
Yes.
Rogers,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. So this motion passes. Thank you, RDA staff, and thank you to the applicants, Chris and Abby. We're excited to see this project happen. So good luck to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I know you this is a small project, but we're pretty excited about it.
Thank you. We're gonna move on to our next item. I would like to say that Board Member Fowler had something to take care of, an emergency, so I will be conducting the meeting. So forgive me and give me a few moments until I get our sheet here. And we're going to move on to item number 4 of our agenda. It's the diversion of property. Let me hold on one moment. Yeah, it's the diversion of property tax for a community reinvestment project area, which is a 9-line interlocal with Salt Lake County. So we'll have a briefing today, and we'll consider adopting a resolution. And at the table or at WebEx, we have Ben Lutke, Danny Walls, Tammy Hansaker, and Lauren Parisi. Would Ben like to introduce this item, or Danny?
I don't have any introduction prepared,
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Great.
Other than to say the board may recall that the City Council, your other hat, and the school board previously approved interlocal agreements to participate in the 9-line community reinvestment area. The county is the last taxing entity that was approached to participate in this project area as well. So that's before you today.
Great, thank you. Danny, it's all yours.
Well, thank you. I was going to say essentially what Ben said, with the addition of turning it over to Lauren and Tammy, who have been working on this. I know Lauren has a presentation prepared that we'll walk through real quickly, and then we'll be prepared for questions at the end. So.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. Does council staff have the presentation they can pull up? Great, thanks so much. So as Ben mentioned, and Danny as well, this is the last interlocal agreement we're going to be reviewing for the 9-line project area with Salt Lake County. And this agreement was approved by Salt Lake County Council early December, which is why it's coming to you a little bit later than the other two. So we can move to the next slide. So a few of the terms with the interlocal agreement for the county differ from what was approved with the city and the school district. So I'll just run through the terms with the county quickly now. The base year will remain the same at the 2016 value, and we should be able to trigger collection this year in 2021. In terms, the collection period will also remain the same at 20 years total. in terms of the participation rate, instead of 75%, the county agreed to contribute 50% of their tax increment to the 9-line CRA to start. And if the RDA completes benchmark projects, by year 6, we would be able to administratively request that their participation increase to 60%. And these benchmark projects include working to establish a sustainable development policy, anti-displacement strategy, and a program to support the construction of accessory dwelling units in the 9-line project area. And then in year 11, the RDA could request an additional increase of the county's contribution to 75%, and that would need to be approved by the county council. So the county's total participation is capped at 3.1 million over the 20 years if we do receive those increases. And then something else I wanted to point out that differs from the city and the school district agreements is that the county will initially pass 100% of their tax increment to the RDA, and then we will subsequently pass back their share, which will range, of course, from 50 to 25%. And this is what you see labeled in the table here as the annual mitigation payment. And this is a benefit to the county because that payment can be used how the county sees fit, as opposed to going directly into their general fund, where the certified tax rate is applied on an annual basis. And then finally, the county requested that the RDA limit the amount of their tax increment used for our administrative budget activities to 4% instead of 10%. And they also requested that 3% of their increment goes back to them for their own administrative fees incurred from processing and managing this particular CRA request for the 9-line. So as I've noted in red here, the 9-line CRA budget will then need to be amended to reflect these specific terms that the county requested and approved in their interlocal agreement. So if we can move to the next slide. Thank you. So the schedule moving forward has changed a little bit from what's written in the staff report. We'd like a little extra time to reach out to the school board as well as the property owners within the 9-line CRA to notify them about the budget amendments. And so that's why the public hearing for the budget amendment has been bumped to March. And afterwards, we hope to bring the finalized interlocal agreement for the State Street CRA with the county to the board in April and bring the subsequent State Street budget amendments back in May. So that is all I have, and I think we can take any questions from the board members.
Thanks, Lauren. I open this to the board members. Questions, let me get you. Okay, so I can see Dan Dugan, then Andrew Johnston.
Yeah, thank you very much. Do you see this agreement with the county going to be the standard moving forward with the county and the school board of 50% participation instead of 75 with incremental changes in the future?
That's a great question. that was the basis for our negotiations and talking points. I will note, as Lauren indicated, with those different levels, that is part of the county policy to try to essentially reduce their initial participation and then tie any increases above and beyond that either to benchmarks or milestones that are part of the project area development. So I think you will continue to see that concept be part of the ongoing discussions. And I think each project area will just have to continue to try to justify or provide reasons for why they would potentially need to have a higher participation rate.
Okay, and on the benchmarks, it talked about the ADU program, but in the benchmarks and what I read was there wasn't really any specific numbers there. You know, it didn't say, hey, you need to have 50% or 10 ADU units in the place. It was just soft as far as the benchmarks. They weren't, to me, they weren't like smart benchmarks, specific and measurable.
Yeah, that's a great observation, and that's a combination of obviously it's always very hard to try to predict what private development may or may not happen in terms of specific number of units being built. So that's difficult when you're looking at a project area of this size. If we had a project area that was more specific and related to a specific development itself, then obviously you have benchmarks that are easier to track with regards to number of units. Our intention was to try to keep those, I don't want to say vague in a bad way, but more higher level goals and objectives that we feel will benefit the project area as a whole, while at the same time not necessarily tying our hands too much for things that are somewhat entirely out of our control. And so that was the back and forth that we had with the county, and Tammy may be able to jump in here a little bit because she was a little bit more involved in some of those meetings than I was.
Yeah, with county staff, we also brought up the fact that it's the RDA board, of course, that sets budget for specific line items. So we were hesitant to lock the board into lock us into any specific number of units because we don't really know what the board will allocate in terms of the ADU program. So that was part of the negotiation process between us and the county.
Yeah, and I can see that really well. I mean, I understand that. My question is that on the county side of the house, they can say, well, you didn't really hit the benchmarks because, you know, our expectations were this, and we're not going to, you know, even though it's administratively to 60%, you have to hit those benchmarks and you have to agree that you hit that benchmark, that soft benchmark. So I'm just concerned with those soft benchmarks being an argument later on at year 6 about you not hitting them, and that's not getting the funds.
Oh, sorry, Tammy, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add, at least in the discussions with county staff members, and I know that detail isn't captured within the agreement, but the important component was us to have the program up and running within the 5 years and not necessarily a specific number of units built.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
All right. Board Member Johnston and then Mano.
Thanks, guys. First question is, does this require us to go back to the other taxing entities to get their approval since the terms have changed?
I will have to notify all the taxing entities about the budget amendments. So yes, because the budget amendments will need to reflect the county's terms.
So we have to go back to the school board again and get them to sign off on this agreement again, or talk to me through that.
And I think, and maybe Tammy, you could speak to this, it's more of an administrative approval. It doesn't necessarily have to be, it's not amending their interlocal.
Yeah, state code is a little bit vague on what we need to do in terms of taxing entity approval for the budget amendments. It just says we need to get their approval. We're touching base with all of them again. That's why we asked for an additional month. We want to make sure we do outreach with the taxing entities and with community members, because the community members are all mailed a notice, and we want to make sure that we're adequately conveying what this budget amendment is. But essentially, what will come to you within the next couple of months is an amended budget that shores up the master project area budget with the terms within each interlocal agreement. So each taxing entity, we had originally requested 25 years, but each of the 3 taxing entities, we've cut that down to 20 years. So the budget's changing, the master budget is changing for each taxing entity. So that's the last step. It's administrative approval. We don't need to go back to the school board or the city council. Essentially, it's just an administrative function.
But the school board when they see this, they could say, we want that deal for us as well, right?
Their interlocal is already executed and they already voted on their terms at 75%.
But they couldn't go back and change it at this point because the county changed theirs, correct?
That's our understanding, and Allison Parks could jump in, but it's our understanding that those interlocals have been executed.
Yeah, thank you, Tammy. And that's a great question. Like Tammy was saying, the interlocal with the school board and the city has already been executed. And so it's possible for those terms to be amended or changed, but the RDA as a party to those agreements would have to agree to that change as well. It would just be an amendment to the existing interlocal. But as Tammy was saying, changing the budget is not changing the terms of the interlocal itself. And it's a less onerous process. It's an administrative process. And it doesn't open up the option to changing all of the terms to the interlocals that are already in effect.
Okay. Second question is something that I'm not sure anybody on the line can talk about, but talk to me about the mitigation payment and what's the benefit to the county and being able to, I'm not going to use the term I want to use, pay the full amount and get some of it back without having to go through their process, essentially.
Yeah, the mitigation payment is a benefit to entities insofar as 100% of the increment gets paid directly to the agency, and then the agency turns around and cuts checks back directly to the entities. We have done this with both the county and Salt Lake City as part of the Block 70 Eccles project area. But the benefit specifically is, as you touched on, that if it was simply that the agency received 50% of the increment, the other 50% would just flow to the taxing entity as it normally does, meaning that it flows back into their general fund. It becomes part of their certified tax rate calculation as part of their annual revenue. By doing the annual mitigation payment, it does not get included in that calculation. And so therefore, it basically becomes a check from the agency that they can then apply however they want, deposit it however they want, and use it within their budget however they please. So it was something that came out of our negotiations with the county. It was not something we understood that was part of the discussions or negotiation with the county council, but county staff informed us that that's what the council staff and the administration essentially seek as part of their negotiations for any interlocal agreement. And so for us, it doesn't make much difference. We still get the net effect. However, for the entity itself, it provides a benefit.
So this is typical in your other dealings? Because, I mean, look, I'm not the county's boss in any way, but it sounds like they're bypassing tax rate essentially. And so they get more money. It doesn't show up on the public record essentially.
Yep, and that's how they indicated it to us, that that's a policy decision that they have made. It's something that we as an agency, I mean, we bring it up as a benefit oftentimes in the conversations, but we defer to the entity itself on how they want to receive the increment and or if they want to engage in that type of structure.
Last question, if I might, Madam Chair. How much does this hamstrung us in the first 5 to 11 years in the amount of funding we may have to implement any policies? Because the point we've had in the past is we need to front load the money to get the big benefit on the back end, and this goes counter to that completely.
Absolutely. And it does hamstring us a little bit insofar of all the reasons you just said, that we generally like to try to front end load a project area so you have the opportunity to have more funds available to encourage the growth in the tax base quickly. The county has the approach that they are a little bit more conservative and they like to see results happen before they really dedicate ongoing revenue. That, in our opinion, is contrary to how tax increment works, and ultimately the entities we feel are protected when you have a cap. That if you have a cap on the maximum amount of increment you receive from a project area and you pay that out in the first 15 years, then that's okay. It hasn't gone the full 20 years. but that is within the county's policy that they try to encourage that. And that's where they like to have a little bit more control of making sure that the agencies are doing what they promise and say that they're going to do before the county really comes in and participates higher. It certainly makes it harder to do reimbursement agreements, which is one of the most important tools as we look at doing development within project areas, because you cannot pledge that increment as part of a repayment.
All right. We need this. I mean, that zip code needs this badly. I'm a little frustrated the county would choose to implement this on a zip code. That's not going to get the money back from them, frankly. Just my personal tick offiness at this point, but I think we need this project in that area. And so I'm desperately hoping that the school board will understand and work with us. I don't want to drag this out another 4 years.
And I think it's important to note that, we realize that the collection of increment from other entities and other budgets is always very sensitive. So we're always appreciative and recognize those impacts. But it is important to note that both within the administrative side as well as the request at 10 years, we do have the opportunity to go back. And if this project area either has greater needs or starts taking off or an opportunity presents itself, there is always that opportunity to go back and ask to amend that budget. So I think we recognize that, the county recognizes that as part of their process. And we're not afraid of obviously being held to a higher standard or benchmarks that we perform to. So we will do our job, and then we will leave that possibility open in the future if it warrants it or generates it, that we can prove a benefit of having a higher participation. So.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate your work, staff.
All right. Board Member Manos, you had a question, right?
Yeah, thanks. I had a question about the performance benchmarks. I actually like the idea of having performance benchmarks set up at the beginning of a project area, just because it has, it's a few, I agree with Council or Board Member Dugan that if they were a little bit more measurable, it might be good, but I like the idea that there's these benchmarks. I like the benchmarks specifically as well, but I did have a question about how those were determined. I get that negotiation between different agencies and different governmental agencies is probably complicated, and logistically it needs to happen between like staff members, like county staff and RDA staff talking to each other. But those three benchmarks, while I agree with them in this case, seem like pretty big policy discussions for the direction of that project area. So I'm wondering where that happens, and if this becomes the model for the future, how can that be more of a public discussion that happens with the board? And then my second question is specific to those benchmarks. I'm reading in the text, it says construction of AD blah, 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 specific to the project area. So these three programs will be constructed specific to the project area, but those seem like programs that we want to have citywide in some cases, or they may be. So does that mean we're not hitting our performance benchmark if we create a citywide ADU program, not a 9-line specific ADU program? So those are two separate questions, I think.
Go ahead, Danny.
I can speak to the performance benchmarks a little bit. And we worked in collaboration with county staff, looking at the 9-line CRA plan and goals within that plan. And the anti-displacement strategy is an example. I think that's actually listed in the plan as a goal. And also sustainable development, and the ADU policy is something that could kind of facilitate preventing displacement. So those are things that we kind of brainstormed with the county, thought aligned with our CRA plan, and also aligned with the county's in ILA, interlocal agreement, or participation policy. So things that they really wanted to see as well. So that's where those kind of came from. And then in terms, could you remind me the second question?
I guess, I think the second part of the first question was, if this is the model for future areas, how did those benchmarks become a little more of a public discussion or something that everyone can sort of participate and contribute to? And then the benchmarks say, the second question is, the benchmarks say that these programs need to be specific to the project area, when it seems like we may want to extend them throughout the city potentially.
Yeah, that's right. And I think from our perspective, especially the sustainability policy, the anti-displacement policy, those are things that we will look at kind of citywide and project area wide in the RDA, but then hone in on the 9-line to meet this benchmark standard specifically for this agreement. But we will initially take a more holistic approach and then zoom in. And I don't know if Tammy and Danny have anything to add.
Yeah, I can add just that the ADU program is also contemplated in the 9-line CRA plan. So in those negotiations with county staff, we were very aware that there was a plan that has already been, it's gone through a public process. It's already been adopted by the RDA board. So we wanted to make sure that all 3 of those benchmarks aligned with policy that you all had already adopted. And I think Lauren's exactly right. The county just said specific to the 9-line plan because they wanted us to make sure and look at the needs and the opportunities within the 9-line plan and make sure we're focusing on that geographic area rather than the city as a whole. I think we can make the programs broader in geography. We just need to show that we're taking the needs and the opportunities within the 9-line into account. Like the ADU program within the CRA plan is contemplated as a solution for that area, not only in sustainability and diversifying the housing type, but the demographic in the neighborhood. It could be a good opportunity to help out with like multi-generational families and things of that nature. So we'll definitely make sure to tailor the programs to the needs of the neighborhood.
Great. Any other questions? Or can we, Danny, there's a resolution and you would like the board to vote on this resolution, correct?
Yes, we are requesting action on the resolution.
All right, any board member that would like to make a motion?
Yeah, Madam Chair. It's Board Member Rogers. I move the council approve a resolution authorizing an interlocal agreement between Salt Lake, actually I should say the board approve a resolution authorizing an interlocal agreement between Salt Lake County and the Salt Lake City Redevelopment Agency for a portion of property tax increment to support the 9-line community reinvestment area plan and implementation.
Second.
Right, we have a motion by Board Member Rogers and a second by Board Member Johnston. We will roll call and Board Member Johnson.
Yes.
Rogers.
Yes.
Wharton.
Yes.
Dugan.
Yes.
Mano.
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Thank you, RDA staff. We are running a little bit behind, so we'll move on right away to the next item, which is item number 5, is the resolution for the disposition of real property for Block 70 project area development. Danny, Jim Serene, and Lauren Parisi are at the table. And we also have Raju Shah, the owner of the Walker Center, and Diane Banks, the attorney representing the owner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we just have Diane with us today. I think Raju had a conflict, and so Diane will be serving as the owner representative if the board has any questions with regard to that. In the interest of time, I'll try to be quick, but I know there's a lot of questions on this, so I want to make sure we provide enough information. I believe we submitted a few pictures. If council staff could pull those up that provide a little context of the property we're talking about. And this is a request for consideration of approval of a resolution authorizing the write down for the sales price on the disposition of 3,100 square feet of property, which resides underneath the underhang of the Walker Center parking garage. So this first slide provides a little context for Block 70. The outline in yellow is essentially the property that the agency owns. We own it in conjunction with both the county and the city for the Eccles Theater, essentially now. at least as far as the balance sheets show, but the ownership is still underneath the agency. The red dotted line represents the parcel that we're talking about today, which resides under the overhang for the parking garage. You go to the next slide, please. This is, going back and forth. This is the space that we're talking about. It should be noted that we literally are just talking about the airspace underneath that overhang. You can see on the right side of the photo, which is the western parcel, that is currently occupied by the backup generator for the Eccles Theater, as well as the trash compactor for the Eccles Theater, which is also shared with some of the surrounding property owners. The eastern half, which is the open area, is currently being used, and it's fenced off, being used primarily as vehicles and storage for theater use, as well as use by one of our retail tenants. The next slide shows just a slightly different angle as it relates to the McCarthy Plaza to the right. You see the smokestack that's attached to the Newmont College building. And then on the far edge is the theater loading docks there. So that is the property we're talking about. We've been having discussions with the property owner since actually as the construction on the theater was wrapping up. We had a purchase and sale agreement executed in 2019. This anticipated the disposition of just the eastern half, the vacant parcel, at an appraised value with no discount at the time. That agreement has since lapsed, mostly because the agency, we did not meet the requirements as laid out within the agreement. We've also had ongoing conversations with the owner as far as changing the scope and the use of that parcel. So we had initiated conversations to amend that purchase and sale agreement. And as part of that amended agreement, RDA staff is proposing to honor that agreement and keep the price constant. However, we recognize that due to the fact that an appraised value updated at this point now represents a discount from that originally negotiated price. As per our land disposition policy, we need to get board approval for any discount over 10%. Our staff memo indicates that we were underway with an appraisal. We have received that updated appraisal. It provides an overall value of the entire 3,100 square feet of just around 100,000, which now represents a reduction of 43,000 from our agreed upon price with the owner of the Walker Center. So where this represents a discount greater than 10%, we need board approval before we proceed with the sale. I should note that as part of that open eastern parcel, we are still in conversations with the owner to carve out a piece of that for storage so that we can support activation of the McCarthy Plaza. So that 100,000 market value will likely be reduced simply because we will be conveying a smaller piece of land. So at the end of the day, if that conveyance reduces it down to 80 or 85,000, then our actual reduction that we're asking approval of the board for is somewhere in the neighborhood of $23,000 to $28,000. So still more than the 10%, but it will come down slightly as far as us retaining some of that property. The reasons this is before you today is our goal as an agency is simply to secure the perpetual use for the compactor and the generator, and then provide some storage for McCarthy Plaza. We are trying to honor that commitment to, as part of our negotiations with the property owner. This is a property that the agency came to own as part of a much larger assemblage, putting together for the Eccles Theater. This is not a piece that we ever specifically went out and bought or pursued as part of a revenue stream, as much as this is something that the generator and the easement were placed there so that we could maximize the use of McCarthy Plaza for activation, and obviously just not have it be part of the theater building. For the owner, this solves a boundary issue of simply owning all of the property underneath the footprint of their building. This is something that we think makes sense. This is something that the owner, as they are looking to start to work towards refinancing their property, whenever they have those conversations with banks, it becomes a question from the banks as far as the underwriting. And inevitably, it always just results in some additional discussion, negotiation, and paperwork and fees to basically account for the fact that they do not own their own footprint. So we as an agency staff feel that they are obviously in the best position to improve the space and incorporate within the space that they already have in their building and potentially expand the uses they have within their building. They can do that much easier as far as tying into their existing utilities. And obviously they have the parking to provide. This owner has been extremely patient as we've continued to work through the process and try to evaluate how we felt was best to move forward as an agency with regard to whether this would ultimately be needed for the theater use or to what extent we would want or need it for the McCarthy Plaza. So they do share our vision in activating the space and having it be a benefit to the surrounding plaza. And they have been a very good partner for the theater and the plaza as far as they have granted the city the easement for the public art on the side of their building, as well as the impact of having the generator and the compactor underneath their building. So given the nature of the property, we feel that this discount is justified when we take into account the storage that we will probably carve into it and the amount of the discount being reduced further. It seems to not make sense to dispose of this property to any other buyer. It does not seem to be something that the agency necessarily should need to retain. And so we are proposing that the board approve the discount.
All right. Then is it customary that we listen to the applicant or the representative, or should we move on with the board members' questions?
We indicated to Diane that she can be here if there are questions. I don't know if she has anything to speak to specifically for the owner, but for this, we just wanted to make sure she was available if the board had any questions.
All right. So I will open it to the board members with their questions to either Danny or Diane. Diane. Okay, Dan, go ahead.
Thanks, Danny. I'm confused on how we own the land, but we don't own the air above it. Because usually the air above it comes with the property. So how are they able to build on our land the structure?
That is the fundamental question. And I see Diane eagerly leaning forward. So she probably has the specific history on it and can provide that answer if that's all right, Madam Chair.
Do you want me to go ahead, Danny?
Please, Diane.
Yeah, let me take that question. So, Mr. Dugan, the Walker Center parking garage was built in about 1958 and 59. And it was built partially on land that was owned by the owner of the Walker Center, and partly on land that was ground leased, and partly on air rights leases. And I know that's a really unusual concept for here in Salt Lake, and believe me, I've really struggled with it when we've financed the property and so forth. For example, part of the parking garage is actually built on air rights that are owned over the alley, if that makes any sense, that alley that's on the west, by other owners, such as the owner of Lamb's Cafe, which isn't Lamb's Cafe anymore. But so the short answer to your question is the parking structure has been there for many, many, many years. And the RDA acquired this property back in what, Danny, 2016?
Would have probably been 2013, 2014 prior to construction of the theater.
Something like that. Mr. Dugan, does that answer your question?
Yeah, so back in the 50s, you purchased the air rights above that land, but you didn't purchase the land itself.
That's right.
And the land was leased by somebody.
At that time, the land was actually owned by the Deseret News Corporation.
Okay, and so you were probably paying, oh, you bought it, so you bought it, yeah.
They were paying the predecessor to Deseret News, or Kearns Tribune, I think it was. And at some point in time, Walker Center Holdings purchased the air right portion from Kearns Tribune.
Okay. And tell me about the generator side of the house. So basically, we would be able to, are we leasing that, or is that just we're allowed to keep that there as the goodwill as far as the write down on the sale
What
price?
we would do is not just goodwill. There would actually be an easement, a permanent easement that's recorded against the property that allows both the generator and the dumpster. And then in addition, Danny, you didn't mention the point that when the generator was installed, the whoever installed it actually installed ductwork for the generator up the side of the property that's owned by Walker Center. And that came as kind of a surprise because we hadn't been approached before that. And that's what actually triggered the conversations back in 2016. So this has been something that's been in the works for a very long time.
All right. Dan, does that answer the question? Do you have another one?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm follow up. So the appraisal was 100K. We're thinking with the, if you just do proportions, it'd be about 85,000 if you don't include the generator compactor of value of the.
No, any further reduction from the appraised values is not necessarily a reduction of the appraised value as much as a reduction in terms of how much of a discount it is. The owners have indicated that we can carve out a small piece for storage. And so obviously if we continue to retain the rights of that, then that just basically reduces the size of developable land that is the result for them.
And in the future, would we still have the parking spots and the whatever else is behind the fences?
We would incorporate within that storage space what we're currently using part of that space for now. And then the parking spaces right now are being used primarily because they just exist. We don't need their continued existence as much as obviously we've had to fence it off, and we do allow people to park there for the theater operations, but that's not necessarily to continue, and we have other ways to provide that parking.
Okay.
Right. Anyway, okay, Mr. Wharton, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering why, if we anticipate that we're going to need the area for storage to better engage McCarthy Plaza, and we're just going to do a permanent easement, why doesn't it make sense just for us to keep the situation the way that it is? I understand that there are potential financing issues, as was explained in the memo, but let's say that maybe I'm not understanding what finance issues that would be, but let's say that they wanted to someday like rebuild the structure, wouldn't, and that was the financing issue that they wanted assistance with, wouldn't it be easier to just have them use the footprint that the garage currently has and not the airspace that goes over McCarthy Plaza?
I would think, given that they've invested in the purchase of the airspace and they have a parking structure and there's a certain efficiency ratio probably associated with that they probably want to continue to be able to utilize those airspace that they have rights to for any future rebuilding of the parking structure. I obviously can't speak to what their plans are, but with regard to our property and the use, our number one priority would be to try to have an active use there in some regard. And that's what we kind of went back and forth with in our conversations with the owner. We recognize that we probably need a minimum amount of storage, and that storage would primarily be for things like storing the tables and chairs in the winter and or supplies that are used to maintain and clean the plaza, as well as maybe some storage for our retail tenant there, right on the corner of the Eccles Theater building. So we don't anticipate that needing to be a lot, and our preference would be probably to have a more active use there than just a passive storage unit. So we see the ability to have both. And the owners have indicated that they have looked at that, and that is something that they would like to do as well. And so we're kind of looking at it solving, multiple problems with one transaction, while still providing us the ongoing use and security we need for the plaza and the theater.
Yeah, I guess, Danny, like what maybe a broader way of putting my question is that, like, while we're still figuring out how exactly we want to further engage and utilize McCarthy Plaza, like, does it make sense right now to make a decision about what to permanently do with something when we with a piece of what we're dealing with, when we don't know what we're going to do with the greater piece? I mean, when we don't have more specific plans about the greater piece, like, would it be better to come up with more specific plans about the greater piece, keep things the way they are right now, and then when we know what we need and how much space we're going to need and how we're going to use it, then we make this more final decision, because we can't really undo this once it's done.
No, that is an excellent point, and that's essentially what has one of the reasons that our purchase and sale lapses, because those improvements to McCarthy are what we have been working on. We do have those now. We have a really good sense of what that next level of improvements are going to be. We have ordered some tables and chairs over the past 2 years to start putting out on the plaza. So you're absolutely right, and my answer to that is that's what we have been figuring out, and we feel comfortable in the position we're in right now.
Okay.
All right, board members, any other questions? Mano, go ahead.
I guess a couple of thoughts. I mean, I think we just approved the option of long-term ground leases for land disposition. I wonder if that was considered for this. But then I guess, I don't know, it just feels like the principle of discounting the sale price of property owned by the taxpayers essentially seems like, I guess I don't understand why we're doing it in this case. It doesn't seem to me like whatever financial deal is needing to happen is going to be undone by like $40,000. It just seems like a very small number for whatever that, I assume, much larger deal is happening, and the principle of that coming out of the sale of land owned by the taxpayer seems a bit odd to me.
No, that's a great question. And I would say that we explored all options from, doing a lease back from them, having them lease it from us. Obviously, the presence of the perpetual easement always provides an interesting component as well. And in the end, we went with what we felt was the simplest approach, which is convey ownership of the property to the building so that it coordinates with the footprint of their building. We get everything we need in terms of the ongoing ability to maintain the space for the generator and the easement, as well as some additional space for storage. And then beyond that, they get the benefit of owning it outright, and then it becomes taxable on their expense sheet. And then we are simply just coordinating with them for our ongoing presence on their property. And that presents a much easier structure and management moving forward. Diane can probably speak to it more specifically. We're not implying that every time they go and do a refinancing, it's some huge hurdle to get over, but it certainly does add to the conversation and the discussion, and ultimately probably the expenses for doing that. That's not the primary reason, as much as that's obviously one of the motivators for the buyer, as well as just the opportunity to have complete ownership of basically their building footprint and outline. So, and I should say that if we as an agency had held up our deadlines and done the work we would have done, a year and a half ago, this would have been a market transaction at appraised value. So we're not proposing a discount at this time simply because the owner is trying to lowball us, or we're trying to subsidize anything, as much as this is just part of how we feel it's appropriate to do it. Had we done our jobs, we would not be here today asking for this discount. This would have just been a market transaction. And I feel strongly that we should honor that. We should honor that price we've negotiated with the owner. And in doing so, we recognize that we've had to get an updated appraised value and that there is now a discount aspect to it. But we think the situation of the property and the benefits and us already accomplishing the goals we set out to accomplish, that it makes sense to just honor that transaction and sell it at the price we agreed to.
Any other questions on this? Okay, so I have a question. So if they give us the perpetual easement on this little storage space that you want, Danny, or that we want for storage, plus the plus the one that we already have where the compactor, I mean, does that affect any of the financing for them? I mean, what's the value to the building? Maybe this is a question for Diane. I mean, why does it matter since you have a perpetual easement and you don't really own it? I mean, you cannot develop it basically. And so why would you want to consolidate that portion that you're giving to us? Does that make sense? Like, yeah. So you will own a portion of this property that you can never develop. So why does it matter?
It's a lot easier to explain. You'll recall Mr. Dugan's question kind of right out of the chute when we started this conversation. And he said, explain this. Why is the air right separate from the ground? And that's exactly what we get from lenders. We have to refinance this property in March. And whenever you refinance it and the lenders say, hey, why have you got an air right here? Why don't you own the surface? It just makes the whole transaction much more difficult.
Okay.
It's really
yeah.
Let me kind of echo what Danny said, because we started this discussion with Justin Beliveau back in 2016. And Walker Center has been ready and willing to perform since 2016. And there was a lot of foot dragging and a lot of delay. And frankly, it was caused by the RDA, which I think Danny would acknowledge. And so at the time that the contract was entered into, it was at market value and we were ready to perform, and the RDA didn't get the property subdivided and we couldn't close. And we would disagree with Danny on the concept that the purchase agreement has lapsed. I don't really think it has. But he wants to get an appraisal. He wants this to, he needs to follow the protocols that the RDA needs to follow. And we're very comfortable that he's doing that. We think it's appropriate. But we also think it's appropriate that the purchase agreement that we entered into should be honored, because it hasn't been our delay that's caused the need to come back for a new appraisal.
But back in the day, Danny, we, regardless of this purchase agreement that you guys were thinking that it could happen sooner, you still have to have the approval of the board, correct?
No.
No, under the land disposition policy, we only need to come to the board if there's a discount greater than 10%. And so, as Diane alluded to it, as we went through, and Allison's popped on so she can provide some additional insight as well. But as we started finally getting back into the conversations with Raju on the sale, we recognized that one, we had not performed under that agreement as the deadline stipulated. Two, that if we were going to go by the strict letter of the law with the disposition policy, that we probably needed to update the appraisal. And then in doing that, we fully anticipated that our negotiated price was going to represent a discount. And so it was at that time that RDA staff and Allison, we made the decision that we probably needed to follow policy. And we recognized that that would probably put us right here of now arguably trying to put the final bow on what was originally a market straight up transaction that the board did not need to be involved in, to now following policy, making sure that we're just covering our bases and approving the purchase price so that it's fully understood that we as staff recognize that the value today is probably slightly different than what we negotiated a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and I just want to add, a little bit of clarity to this is that, like Danny had mentioned earlier, in 2019, the parties executed a purchase and sale agreement, but the purchase and sale agreement was for only half of the property, and the appraised value was at about $56,000. And so under RDA policy, because it was at fair market value for that smaller piece of property, it did not need to come to the board for approval. But here, the Walker Center would like to purchase the whole piece that's underneath the Walker Center, which is about 3,000 square feet. So it's almost twice as much. And because of that, we got a new appraisal to evaluate the whole cost of that piece of property. And so, you know, Diane was saying that she's fine to honor the agreement, but you know, our understanding is if she wants to and her client wants to purchase the whole piece underneath the overhang, the purchase and sale agreement needs to be amended anyway. And if we're going to honor that original price, then that's what we're here for the board to give approval on based on the property disposition policy.
Can I just respond to what Allison said?
Sure, real quick, and then Darren and I have more questions too, but we have to move on. Go ahead, Diane.
At the time that we entered into the purchase agreement, nobody really knew how much square footage there was. So on the first page, it says approximately such and such square feet to be determined by the survey, and the survey was supposed to be attached, but then the survey has only recently been done. And I think Danny would agree, everyone thought that what we were using in the purchase agreement was the whole thing. But even going beyond that to now the new appraisal, the part that isn't included in that original purchase agreement that Allison is referring to, under the new appraisal, the appraiser is only valuing that at $10,000. So even if you looked at it that way, it would be 56 plus 66 would be a total of 66.
Okay, thank you. Darren?
Yeah, I have more questions that related to the appraisal and how that all works. But before I ask them, I know we're really late on time. Do we want to keep going now, or should we reschedule this? I want to take more time for questions, but I do have questions before I'm ready to approve it.
Me too. I think to me, it's we're talking about land disposition at prime real estate, downtown Salt Lake City, and it's very important, at least for me, as a fiduciary agent or responsibility, that if we were to dispose, that it's fair to the taxpayers of Salt Lake City, and because it's so unclear, and because I can see other possibilities to activate this plaza, and by us owning it and not disposing of it, I think it's my opinion, and I would like to continue this discussion at a later meeting. If that's Danny or somebody from council staff, do we need to straw poll, or do we need to straw poll on this, or do we just move on?
Madam Chair, it's at your discretion as chair. So you can continue this, recognizing that it is the preference of the requester that you get it adopted tonight. If the board's not ready to do that, then you can just, by virtue of being the chair, refer this to a future meeting for further discussion.
Okay. Just by nodding, is everybody at the board okay with this?
Well, Madam Chair, I just have a couple.
Go ahead.
I don't know if they're really questions, more of comments. And I came into this conversation, this discussion, completely open-minded because I thought the same thing and the same concerns. But to be completely honest with you, I believe Diane has persuaded me due to the fact that the RDA from 2016 in a different administration completely sidetracked and derailed this from her. I can speak from experience that with the public market at the fairgrounds, I had that same experience. So for me, I'm completely fine moving forward with this after explanations from Danny you know, really it's not going to be anything to benefit the city there, except for actually use it for what its purpose is and to activate the plaza. So I appreciate Danny and his presentations for me personally moving forward. And Diane, I'm sorry that you had to experience the same thing that I did with the RDA in the prior administration.
All right. I understand. I'm not trying to be difficult. I just want to make sure that we do look at all possibilities and that what we're disposing of, it's fair for our city and our residents and the taxpayers. And so that's why I still have, I'm not convinced about it. And I would like to do this at a later time. I'm sorry about that.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
because you do have someone who's dissenting, it's probably better if you do a straw poll to ask the board.
Okay.
If it were just consensus, you'd be fine just saying it, but probably a straw poll is in order.
All right, I would like to straw poll to continue this conversation in our future meeting. Everybody? I don't see Councilmember Johnston. I don't see board member. Well, I could see Mano, Dugan, and Wharton, and myself, and then Rogers is a no. I don't. Fowler is absent, and then Johnston is absent. So we'll move forward to the next meeting with this project. We'll make a resolution, I promise. It just needs more information. All right. We're moving on to let's see, to the next project. And it is actually we're gonna have to unfortunately we won't be able to get to number 6 and number 7, which will also be in our next meeting, and we will do the number 8 RDA audit review and approval for fiscal year 2019 and 20, and then Jennifer Bruno, I'm not sure if she's here for this item. Cindy?
We can just ask the RDA staff to do the introduction. The board plays a major role in funding the audit and in hearing the audit and adopting a resolution relating to it.
Right.
Yeah, happy to give a real brief overview. The reason this is back before you as a board here in January is because in December, you were reviewing and approved a draft of the audit, as well as that meeting had some notification issues. And so we felt, just to kind of make sure we had the formal stamp on this, that we would ask you to take action on the audit as it is now finalized. It has already been sent out and distributed as per 17C. But just to make sure we followed protocol, we felt that it was appropriate to have a formal vote on this and just approve it as final form. Thank you.
Board members, any questions on this? No? All right, I don't see anybody's hands up. So do we have a motion for this?
Yes, someone needs to make a motion.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
I move that we adopt that we approve the RDA annual audit for 2019-20.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Member Wharton, a second by Dugan. We'll roll call. Rogers?
Yes.
Wharton?
Yes.
Dugan?
Yes.
Mano?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. I don't see Johnston here. Are you here, Andrew? I don't think he is. All right, so Johnston and Fowler are absent.
Board member Johnston had to leave for another meeting, but he said he would be back. But we're still waiting for him to return.
He's representing the city at a housing legislative meeting.
All right, great. We are going to move on to, let's see, when do we do end this meeting at 4? Well, we're gonna have to also move item number 9 to our next meeting. And so we're going to go to item number 10, which is a motion to meet remotely without an anchor location. Do we have a motion sheet for this? And can somebody make the motion?
Madam Chair, I move that we ratify the decision to continue to meet without an anchor location pursuant to HB 5002.
Second.
Right. A motion by Councilmember Wharton and second by board member Sari Dugan. I'm going to roll call, and we're going to start with Wharton.
Yes.
Mano,
Yes.
Rogers,
Yes.
Dugan,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. Absent board members Fowler and Johnston. Moving on to item 11, report and announcements from the executive director. Danny, do you have anything for us?
I was looking to see if the mayor was on or if Rachel or Lisa wanted to say anything. I don't see the mayor on, but I have just a few quick updates, if that's all right, Madam Chair.
Please, go ahead.
Real quickly, in the interest of time, I just wanted to inform the board that we have closed on the disposition of the 255 South State Street property. We met the deadline by the end of the year. This was a Herculean effort that involved the closing, not just on our disposition, but obviously all of the tax credit financing, their primary financing, and all of our loans and seller notes. And so this was arguably probably one of the largest transactions we as an agency have done. And it took a huge team effort led by Court in our office, along with Corinne, Robin, and Rachel. I want to make sure we especially thank the attorney's office. Allison and Kimberly were very instrumental in preparing these documents. And together, along with Cindy Lou, it's my understanding they were in City Hall till 10 o'clock one night, copying the documents and helping this transaction go through. So we would not have been able to do it without everyone's help. So I want to make sure the board's aware that we pulled it off. Thank you again for all of your support. The developer has already given the notice to proceed to their contractor, and you see equipment on the site already. So that project is underway. Thank you again for all of your help in that. And then only other update was that as per the city council approval within the budget amendment, allocating $700,000 in CARES Act funding to the RDA, we were successful in distributing every dollar of that to 19 of our recipients. And we did that as well within just a matter of a few weeks to meet that deadline. And so the end of the year was not slow for us in the RDA, but wanted to make sure you understood that we did provide that much needed assistance and got that out the door. So thank you again for that. And unless there's any questions, that's the extent of our updates.
That's great. Does anybody have any questions on those items? I want to say congratulations. That's awesome. Wow, that's really, I'm excited to see that project on State Street move forward. It's been there, right, for a long time, just lingering. So I'm excited to see that. And then the 19 recipients, did we get a briefing of who and where already, or?
We did not. We can certainly provide that information to the board if you're interested in seeing that. And so maybe that's something we can provide in one of our updates to you, Madam Chair, and be happy to provide some background on how that came about.
That would be great. Thank you. All right, moving on to item number 12, report and announcements from RDA staff. And I'm not
I hijacked the mayor's updates for our staff updates, sorry.
That's okay. So are they here or that's all you had? That's all you had?
That's all we have. Thank you.
All right, so item number 13 is report of the chair and vice chair. I don't have anything today, and I'm not sure if Amy did, but if former chair had announcements, I will make sure to bring them back on our next meeting on the 19th. And any other new reports. Then we're moving on to item D. We have no written briefings. We have item E, no consent. And do we have a closed session? I am not aware of one, but do we? Cindy?
No. As far as I know, you don't. Danny, is that correct?
Correct. We don't have any need.
Right.
Thanks, sorry.
No problem. So item G, it's our adjournment. So thank you very much. We will keep in touch, everybody, and I will see you at the next RDA meeting, which is February 19th, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep. And if I could just say, I'm not sure if Amy will be back, and so we are coordinating with James, Councilmember Rogers, to conduct the next meeting as the vice chair. Councilmember Rogers, do you want to take a 10-minute break?
Yeah, let's say 4:30.
Okay. All right.
Does that work for everybody?
Thank you.
To a different link?
Yeah, it's a different link.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
RDA adjourn will meet at 4:30 as council.